Welcome, folks, to the Build Me a Brewery podcast. My name is Chris Hayton, your host. You're listening to part 2 of the financing and capital raising segment of the series. I hope part 1 of the segment gave you some good perspectives and other options to consider. This episode, I chat with Jason Baylis from Red Windows Capital, who specialises in equipment finance for the brewery and winery industries. This is another interesting option to explore when it comes to accessing much needed capital when starting out with the building of your brewery. The purchasing of your equipment such as the brew house, fermentation tanks, heat exchangers, glycol units, pumps, cleaning place systems, keg washers, canning lines, to name only just a few, are going to be a huge bite out of your budget when first starting out. This option of being able to finance your equipment through a rental agreement with a service such as Red Windows Capital enables you to free up funds when you are first starting out to dedicate towards other areas of the business that might otherwise be neglected in the beginning, such as marketing, accounting systems, etc., due to the limited funds left over in the budget if you were to outlay those costs for equipment outright in the beginning. Jason explains this financing option in much more detail and how it all works for aspiring brewery owners in our interview. So without further delay, I hope you enjoy my chat with Jason Baylis from Red Windows Capital. Welcome, Jason, to the Build Me a Brewery podcast. Thanks for coming on, mate.
No, thanks, Chris. Thanks for having me.
Like I've done many times before, I've given the audience a bit of an interlude into what this episode is about and the topics we're going to be covering. So this episode is going to form part of our series on financing and capital raising. I'm trying to explore all the different angles that are available to new businesses and startups, which can be a bit of a challenge I'm finding of trying to secure capital, for people taking the risk of, investing in a startup. I've had Johnny Wilkinson from Equitize, who's talked about the equity-based crowdfunding side of things. I'm hoping to engage with a small business broker or lender who, is favourable to new business startups. But I was quite interested in the services that yourself offer through Red Windows Capital. So essentially, you're an equipment leasing or rental business, particularly in the brewing industry, wineries, distilling. So I thought it would add a lot of good, relevant content to our listeners to sort of learn about that side of things. But before we do get into all the, bread and butter of what you do and services, are you able to just give the audience, a bit of an idea about yourself, how you got into the space that you work in now, and if you want to just take it there, we'll start it off that way.
Yeah, no worries. So I actually grew up in McLaren working. My family had vineyards there, and I was already involved in, the wine industry side of things. I then got into sales for wine, in a regional area. Tried to move back home to Adelaide. Couldn't get any work, so I ended up working for a bank. But obviously, I wanted to get back into the wine industry, and this business was, morphed in both industries. So it was finance, but it was also at the time wine based. Started working for a company which does basically similar to what we do, where we were financing wine barrels predominantly. Then after doing that for 10 years, with some other shareholders, former directors, we started up Red Windows Capital, basically. So we've been going now for 3 years. So we started off just sort of focused on the wine side of things, but now sort of we're getting into our fourth vintage. We decided to get back into the beer industry. I personally love the craft beer industry, so I was excited to get back into it.
Yeah, excellent. And you're based in Adelaide?
Yes. Yep. Yeah. So, my business partner, he's got an office in McLaren Vale. So I actually just work from home generally. Basically in Adelaide. Yeah.
Yeah, but your services extend right across Australia.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Excellent. And just touching on it, because I know that we'll definitely dive into more around the services and how the arrangement of the leasing of the equipment works. Are you able to go through all the different services you do offer?
Yeah, so basically, we're an asset finance business predominantly, based in the wine, the beer, and the spirit industry. So we finance assets like whether it's a wine barrel, a brewery, pumps, chillers, that kind of stuff. So we finance all of our stuff done under an operating lease. So it's really simple process. Generally, we can get stuff done within about 48 hours. So unlike banks where it could take weeks, months, we can get stuff done pretty quickly.
And it's primarily just the, beverage manufacturing industries.
Yeah, predominantly. I mean, we have just through relationships and stuff like that, done a bit of stuff outside of those areas, but that is our key business. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Moving into more of the nitty gritty details of how it all works. You mentioned there earlier an operating lease. I guess maybe just to give the listeners an idea, and I guess I've now know the difference through some of my research leading up to our chat, but are you able to tell us what the differences are between a financing lease and a operating lease?
So basically with a finance lease, the customer actually owns the equipment themselves. So generally this is what a bank would work under, is a finance lease. So what will happen is obviously there's a bit of more of a strict credit process. They may ask for other assets, your house. They may ask for director's guarantees. So from a bank's point of view, they want as much security as possible. So whereas under an operating lease, the actual equipment, we buy it and we own it. So that's our security. So that's where, we don't need to see we don't need director's guarantees. We don't need houses. We don't need to see financials. So because we're happy in that space that we own the equipment, if obviously worst case scenario, we have to go and repossess that equipment, we know the industry quite well, where we know where we can actually resell or move that equipment pretty quickly.
Right. Okay. So there's definitely no options for someone wanting to purchase a piece of equipment at the end of the contract. That ownership stays with Red Windows. Is that right?
No, well, technically, no.
No.
With an operating lease, it is a traditional rental model. So basically, technically you should be giving the equipment back to us. But we don't normally work that way. We don't want to own the equipment. So we generally give the customer an option at the end of it just to buy it off of us. And whether that be for $1 or whether potentially, there's a 20% residual or something like that. We can work that out at the start, and the customer has that option at the end of the contract, obviously, to buy it for that amount.
Okay, right. So, and I'm not that financially. I'm not all up to hit with all the lingo when it comes to the operating lease and rental side of things. But is that something that is a common thing when people are purchasing, like a brewery purchasing a fermenter or tank or a brew house, or even the winery industry purchasing barrels with you? Is that a common thing that they will end up purchasing it after the contract?
Yeah, pretty much 100% of the time.
Yeah. Okay. Right.
I mean, if the asset itself, I mean, it's a bit different to, I guess, a computer and iPad, where technology, I guess, evolves pretty quickly. So, at the end of a 3-year rental, you're better off actually to hand it back and get a new one anyway. Obviously, with a brewery, it's a little bit different, or even a barrel. So, the lifespan generally is a bit longer than what the term is. So, at the end of it, the customer gets that option.
And what are some of the minimum eligibility requirements for customers? I imagine that you have to do some sort of vetting process before approving them.
Yeah, so we do, I guess, our internal credit assessment. We also do use an online credit assessor as well. But for us, I guess the key thing that we're looking for is someone that is invested into the idea of starting a brewery or buying some equipment. And for us, that's generally a 20% deposit. So that way, in the past, I've worked with other finance businesses where, it might only be a 5%, 10%. And we found that it was easier for someone to walk away. Whereas obviously if they're putting in 20% themselves, it's quite a large investment. They're spending a lot of their own money to do it. So they're more likely to have, done their due diligence with setting up the business, when doing planning, whether, looking at operating expenses and stuff like that. So, for us, the biggest thing for us is 20% deposit up front.
So if I've, done some research and I've zeroed in on a certain supplier from, say, China, or somewhere overseas, and I've made the decision that I'd like to go ahead with purchasing it. What's the steps that customers should be taking if they want to go down the route with using someone like you as a financing option?
Well, one of the key things from our point of view is we do require that there is an Australian-based company here that is potentially importing the equipment.
Yep.
We've sort of in the past, in previous life got caught out where we've imported direct out of China, and basically from a health and safety, we're technically the importers in that case. So we actually are reliable. So if something does happen down the track, then it's on us. So we've made a decision internally where you need to have an Australian-based company. So whether that be Spark Brew or Cask or someone like that, we buy the equipment from them. So generally our customers will come to us and they'll say they've been talking to a supplier here in Australia. They present us with basically a quote or an invoice, and then we just put together our paperwork from that end. So we'll provide a quote as well as a rental agreement for the customer to look over. If they're happy with that, they sign off on that. They pay a 20% deposit. Then we raise our purchase orders with the supplier and we get it underway. Right. So it's pretty simple and straightforward. And the other bonus for our customers is obviously with brewing equipment, a lot of it is coming from China or Italy or somewhere. We actually, our direct debits or the customer repayments don't start until after the equipment's been delivered.
Yeah. Okay. And you mentioned earlier there Spark Brew, so Julian's business there, and I was actually speaking with Julian the last couple of weeks. So I'm hoping to sort of have him on and talk a bit about equipment sourcing side of things. And I might have spoken out of turn because I think this episode might air after our chat with Julian, but nonetheless. So you essentially are a preferred financing option for Spark Brew when customers are engaging them and they say, well, if you need help with finances, they sort of recommend them to you. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah. So Julian is actually the reason why I got into the whole brewing side of things, just by a chance meeting at a winery. I met Julian, and I guess from his point of view, he wanted to provide a service to his customers where they have an option besides a standard bank or crowd fundraising and stuff like that. So I got together with Julian, and we basically said, look, when you present to the customer, a price, you may even want to present with a finance option. So Julian he's always supported me along the way, and likewise. So we've done quite a lot of business together, and it makes it easier for, I guess, a supplier to be able to sell a product when they've got that option in the back pocket already.
And is there any I guess restrictions on the type of equipment? Obviously, probably being related to the brewing and winery or distilling industries, but is there any restrictions on the types of equipment that fall within that space?
Generally, the way I sort of tell people is, if you can pick it up and move it, then we should be able to finance it. The only thing really, things like piping or glycol systems, we don't do. But we do, obviously the brewery itself. We do pumps, chillers, keg washers, canning, bottling lines. So most of the stuff that you find inside a working brewery, we should be able to do. It's just the thing, we must be able to, like I said, worst case scenario, we have to be able to go in there and pick it up and be able to resell it. So, even things like forklifts, stuff like that, we're happy to do.
And what are some of the more specific details around the contract agreements? Like, is there a particular standard one, or maybe go into a bit of detail about standard contract lengths, repayment schedules, maybe what the interest rate might be? I know that would be depending on what the current interest rates are at any one time, but are you able to give us a bit of detail around that?
Yeah, so generally, I mean, we work with, we actually work with the customer, and it comes back to, I guess, their cash flow. So we're pretty flexible about how we structure it. So, some customers want to pay a 50% deposit. Our standard obviously is generally a minimum of 20. We can finance it from 1 year to 5 years. So again, it comes back to what their cash flow is, and that's where I can provide different options for the customer. They can have a look at how their cash flow sits, and the best option for them may be do over a 3-year term if it's only a small item. Obviously, bigger ticket items like breweries, generally they're 5 years, and then we do a monthly direct debit. And at the end of it, like I said, they've got the option to buy that, buy the equipment outright. With regards to an interest rate, because it's a rental model, technically we don't have an interest rate as such, but generally our customers work backwards on it. So it's cost of goods versus, I guess, total repayments. How I try and explain it is if it's $100,000, and you finance over 12 months, you generally pay about sort of $108,000. So you pay that $7,000 or $8,000, per annum. So if it's over 5 years, you pay back $140,000. Yeah, I mean it's a fairly straightforward. I mean most accounts just work, like I said, they work backwards from cost of goods versus total rentals.
Percentage-wise, compared to distilling, winemakers, and the brewing industry, how does that look in terms of what equipment or customers that you're sort of engaging with?
What, as in internally or?
Well, is it majority of the customers that you're dealing with in the winery space, winemaking space, or is it, an even spread? Is there a lot of craft beer breweries or small breweries starting out engaging with you guys, or is it sort of more the distilling, winemaking space?
At this stage, it's definitely more wine, and that was, I guess, when we started up Red Windows Capital. I guess the other shareholders, they've got a more of a wine background. So when we started, we thought, let's focus on the wine industry because of the relationships we have there. And then obviously we've grown the business to the point now where we want to get back into the brewing side and the distillery side. So they are still quite small. But saying that though, we've been doing a lot of quoting for breweries at the moment. And just the pure dollar value, that could turn probably pretty quickly if we get a few across the line. When you're talking sort of $400,000 or $500,000 for a brewery, you can pick up quite a lot of business pretty quickly.
Is there a big difference in the amount of equipment and capital needed between the two, winemaking and beer making?
Probably not when it comes to the equipment side of things. And there's a lot of equipment obviously is very similar. Everyone's got tanks, they've got pumps, chilling systems. I guess the biggest difference probably is the ongoing wineries generally obviously finance a lot of wine barrels. So from an ongoing expense or an ongoing cost, there's obviously that expense. Every year they might spend $100,000 worth of, on wine barrels. Whereas I guess a brewery, they're not really invested that much in barrels just yet. There are some getting there, but obviously it's the initial setup of the brewery, like I said, pumps, chillers, canning or bottling. It's that initial expense to actually set that up. Then after that, it's just probably maybe updating equipment, hopefully as they're growing.
I think maybe on some of our equipment sourcing episodes, as well as a chat I had recently with Chris Kelly from East Coast Canning, we're talking about the huge expense that a brewery has to fork out for the packaging side of things, like, a canning line. You see a lot of startup breweries who are still trying to make a profit and get established. They just don't have the money left in the budget to afford a canning line. So they might engage someone like East Coast Canning or a mobile canning service to assist with, getting their beer into cans and packaging. Do you see a lot of startup breweries engaging someone like you to afford that side of, or that piece of equipment, the canning side?
Yeah, I mean, obviously canning and bottling lines, generally we see that happen a few years into the business. So like you said, they'll use mobile canning lines, up until the point where they think the return on investment's a lot better if they do it themselves. And I guess the other thing from a brewery's point of view is you're paying for someone to come out for a day. So you've got to try and, I guess, cram as much as you can. And sometimes beers aren't potentially ready. But from an expense point of view, you've got to discount it anyway. So from a quality of product, at some point you make that decision, say, well, look, let's invest some money and get our own canning line. So, like I said, generally we see that sort of year, maybe 2 or 3, they come to us and ask for a can line. There are others that, they know exactly what they want and it's all part of what they're doing. I mean, we did a couple of canning lines already this financial year. So it's definitely, an option for people to do their own canning for sure.
Is there a growing trend as to the types of suppliers that I guess the Australian brewery community is sort of leaning towards?
Well, in regards to canning and bottling, or just in
Well,
general?
yeah, maybe start with that. But I guess in general, I mean, you hear a lot of, in my research so far, I've heard of, with Julian, the Spark systems that they use. They seem pretty smart as to how they stack up on top of each other. And I know a few breweries in Sydney and Australia that do use those systems. I've heard of the DMEs, the IDDs. Tiantai in China are a pretty reputable one. I know the Grifter have I think it's Han Yun. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. But, so is there, you get to see a wide range of suppliers or you get to see all the different breweries using certain suppliers. Is there a couple that you can throw out right now as to, a regularly used supplier in brewery equipment?
Yeah. I mean, obviously, like I said before, I've done quite a bit with guys like Julian at Spark Brew. Premier Stainless is another one that it generally comes up in the conversation. Recently, we've done some, quote on some boutique equipment.
Yep, with Neil Cameron's firm. Yep.
Yeah. So there's a number of different guys out there, and a couple of the Chinese guys you mentioned, CNCI and stuff like that. I've done that in the past. From canning line, cask is probably the one that keeps popping up for us.
Yeah.
We've got a couple of people that we deal with, and a lot of those guys, they actually recommend us as well, which is really good because, and I keep mentioning to equipment supply guys, it's a big ticket item. Companies are spending $120,000 on a canning line. It's not always an easy sell. And again, this is my experience in the wine industry is they may have, a capital expenditure budget for the year and it might be $50,000. So when they're looking at a $100,000 system, it's not going to work from just yet. So that's where I guess we come into play and say, well, look, if you finance it over 5 years, it's, it might be $25,000 a year. So it actually fits in their budget. And I guess one of the important things is just to look on the return on investment for the customer. That's key, I think, when it comes to brewing.
Mm. And I know this question might be very varying in terms of the answer that you can give us, but what are some of the average, figures that you're sort of, or equipment that you're financing, like the costs? Is most people coming to you for financing entire a brew house, or is it more on the tank side or canning side? Like, what are some of the average costs that that you guys are financing? Like, is it typically 100K operating leases, or can you share a bit of detail around that?
Yeah. So generally from a brew house side of things, you're probably looking at probably starting off around sort of the $140,000, $150,000. And we've done stuff up to probably $500,000 for quite a large system. From a canning side of things, probably anywhere between $50,000 to $150,000 for a canning line. So I guess they're probably, I guess, round figures on average. Probably on average, a brew house for us is around that 250. That's probably the sweet spot.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So with that, generally, I think it's about a 15 hex system.
Yeah. Okay. Is that a sort of the sweet spot at the moment for breweries starting out? I mean, I hear stories of people starting very small, that nano micro brewery small, 200, 300, 500 liters sort of side of things, just wanting to be a small little brew pub to the local community. But is there sort of a trend that you're seeing with new breweries coming, opening up? What size hex systems they're going with?
Yeah, look, I mean, it depends on the business itself. For example, Julian, I know at Spark, they do the 500 litre system, the K5 and the K10, which is that compact system that you're talking about. So if you're going to a brew pub or something like that, you've got in a small space. I mean, we're doing a lot of quoting on the K5s at the moment, just from a size point of view. I guess if you're looking at that larger production scale, then you're talking your 15, probably as a start, your 15 hex system. Obviously, what I've seen in the past as well is, I guess you in your business plan, it all comes back to how much beer you can sell realistically. And obviously people are a little bit cautious, and we always generally, which is a good thing probably, we see people get two smaller systems to start with, and they're brewing 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. So, sometimes planning is very important when it comes to how many kegs you think you might be able to sell, to how big, obviously, the system you jump into. So, like I said, generally speaking, people will start probably around that 15 or 1,000 litre system. But, it's always good to see in a couple of years' time they're coming back to us and saying, look, we need to get a 15 hec or a 25 hec system because we can't keep up with supply.
I know that we've tried to focus this episode predominantly on the equipment leasing and financing side, but with your experience in that space, I've had other people on talk about, like Johnny from Equitis about the equity-based crowdfunding, and there's traditional bank loans, but getting access to startup business capital is quite difficult in Australia. I imagine it's probably difficult everywhere you go. It's a high risk for a bank or an investor to invest in something that hasn't got a proven track record for sales or hasn't even opened yet. There's a high risk of it failing. But any other out of the box options that you could suggest to people to look into? Obviously the equipment financing side is of interest to me, but anything else you'd like to share?
I guess it is hard to get funding as a startup, definitely. It's probably getting worse actually at the moment. Banks, tend to want 3 years financials these days. They also want 3 years of financials where you're actually making profit. So as a startup, generally the first couple of years you're probably not making a profit. So it does take a while to become established in order to get bank finance. And that's, I guess, why we're in the business, because we don't need huge amounts of money. We don't need houses or other assets. So I guess because of that, that's why we exist. Putting that initial money is I guess the problem.
Yeah, no, I'm starting to see that. I sort of have likened that Gypsy Model, I guess, route starting out as a way of getting greater access to capital. Like, got a brand out there, beers out there, got a bit of a following. There's some sales happening. However, I know that the Gypsy Model isn't very sustainable long term. In terms of, you might be operating at a loss in the beginning, and you're lucky to break even at some point. I consider the Gypsy Model as a bit of a springboard into owning my own physical brewery, but I just thought that might be a way. Do you have many customers at that stage as a Gypsy brewer who are looking at then springboarding their own physical brewery? They've maybe been doing it for a few years or a couple of years, and then they engage with you and they're ready to sort of buy tanks and stainless.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. We probably don't have as many right now because we've only just got back into that beer side.
Yeah. Okay.
But previously, yeah, definitely. We had a number of customers who were Gypsy brewing for quite a while. A good example, Swell Brewing. I remember Dan Wright coming to me, and we financed one tank for him, and he was brewing at Vale Ale, and that was probably about 6-7 years ago. So he bought one tank, we financed it for him, and he did that for quite a number of years, until the point where his brand was out there enough for him to take that leap and start up his own brewery. So he's now obviously doing that in Parnvale, and it's going really well for him. When
you say the one tank, was that when he had decided to make that jump from Gypsy Brewing to owning his own physical brewery, or he just had he'd brew somewhere and put a tank in a tank in a brewery somewhere, and he'd own that tank? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. So he would go down. Yeah, he would brew down at Vale Ale, and they always didn't have tank space for him. So in the end, he just bought his own tank, one tank to start with. But yeah, that's how he started. So yeah, wineries, for example, will get their wines made off-site or another winery, a contract processing facility, and the storage fees to actually store wine in tank can become quite expensive. So generally their options are to buy, say, used barrels and store them in a used barrel, or the other option is just to go buy themselves their own stainless steel tank. And I guess that's what Dan was probably looking at as well. So his storage costs probably were quite high. And so he made that decision to go and buy a tank, and because obviously when you finance it, you're only probably 20% deposit, so it's not a huge outlay, but the return on investment you're getting from saving on storage fees, generally they pretty much work out as the same as our repayment costs. So you might as well buy something, end up owning a tank rather than paying for someone else's tank.
So, Dan, you were saying purchased a tank for you guys, which under an operating lease.
Yep.
At the 3 years, he was able to buy that off you. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, and he still actually got that tank at the new brewery.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I guess it's sort of sentimental to him, I guess, in terms of that's what started him off. Yeah.
And I mean, we've done a number of guys, like you said, who were Gypsy Brewing for probably 2 or 3 years. They built that brand where they were probably generating enough income to start up their own site. And again, you always go back to that return on investment. It is maybe a big outlay to start with, but in 5 years' time, you own your brewery rather than paying for someone else's lease.
All right. Any other closing thoughts on the equipment financing side before I sort of dive into a bit of the? Love to get some of your opinions about some industry insights about the craft beer industry, and maybe if you want to comment about the wine industry as well. But any closing thoughts or advice on the financing and operating leasing side?
Yeah, well, I mean, unfortunately, I have seen a few breweries fail along the way, and I think the key side of it is to really put a lot of effort into your planning, do a lot of your due diligence. If you have to, pay the right advisors, because whether we've seen people where they've got a brewery and they can't actually brew because they don't have approval yet. So council approval. Even approval from your neighbours, because they're probably going to complain as well. Making sure liquor licensing is up to date, food and safety, all that kind of stuff. Because I've seen a number of businesses where the brewery is sitting there, they're paying for it, and it could be anywhere up to 12 months where they couldn't actually make a beer. And that's definitely what's going to kill your business, if anything. So if you make sure you've got everything in place before actually, taking that jump and buying a brewery, it's going to go a long way. And again, we've seen that in the wine industry. Make sure you don't have all your eggs in one basket as well. So, focus on your key domestic markets before going overseas. Obviously, if you've got a cellar door or you've got a brewery where people are coming in. I think that's key, because that's where you're going to make all your margin as well. So you're not paying 30% distribution. So if you can look after those key people in your area, it's going to be huge.
The amount of people that have come on and talked about that tap room margin being so crucial to, especially early day startups in the brewery industry, is amazing. How many people have sort of talked about that. And that's definitely something I'm taking on board, is making sure that is a focus as well, because you don't you got to produce a lot of liters a year to be playing that production space, so or even get into that retail distribution space. So taking a lot from that. But moving on to, I guess, industry insights. Love to get your thoughts on the state of the craft beer industry. I know that you said that you've probably only just started playing in that space the last couple of years. It's been more of the wine side of things, but if you care to share some comments on both and the current state or future outlook of those two industries.
Yeah, well, I guess very, very different industries. I guess the beer industry here in Australia, the craft beer scene, I guess, is a lot younger than the wine industry is. But it's still on that. I still see it on that gradual that way up still. I guess a lot of people compare us to America, and us being, I guess, 10 years behind what they're doing. So we're not at that point where it's flooded, I don't think, just yet. I mean, I love craft beer personally. I still think that we've got a long way to go when it comes to, and it might be my personal opinion because my other business, but barrel aging. There's a lot of guys doing some great stuff in barrels. Guys like one of my favourite beers is the Wildflower guys up in New South Wales. I do a fair bit of business with those guys. Even the bourbon stuff. Hawkers, Boat Rocker. Again, the volume that we're doing is quite small compared to what America does. So, I think there's a lot more people starting to play in that space. There's still obviously a lot of, hazy IPAs around, and, but I think the sours and farm ale, Serene, those guys, I mean, I guess from, you look at the winery guys, they are, I guess, attracted to generally, pale ales, sparkling ales, stuff like that. But, I can definitely see people who are wine drinkers liking something with as, real complexity. So, your barrel aged stuff, your sours, I guess those type of beers, I think, appeal to more people than just your general beer drinkers. So, I've seen, I guess, more people, buying barrels, whether it's wine barrels, whether it's bourbons, rum barrels, cognac brandy barrels. I've just sold some 2,500 litre fooders to guys like Little Bang Brewery. So we sold about, what did we sell? About 10 of them to different breweries around Australia. So, there is, I think, a push into that area, which is, I think is fantastic.
Yeah, no, it's there's definitely starting to be a lot of creative sort of beers coming out. Like I never thought, when I first heard of sour beers, I thought, why would someone want to drink that? But I've had a couple now myself. I wouldn't say I'm fully converted, but I can see the appeal. We're starting to jump on a bit of the bandwagon as to what the US have, with those hop forward type beers. And I know that even the low alcohol beers are starting to pop up as well, and I didn't realize how difficult it was actually to make the things as well, low alcohol beers.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people that say that you need to have special equipment to do it, to sort of get the same mouthfeel and, but, still have low ABV on it. So, it is interesting of what beers are coming out and sort of trends and fads. So in terms of the financing side of things in an industry aspect, how has COVID impacted you guys with, I imagine you guys have had to tighten up a few things with what you can lend and approve. Has that affected you guys at all?
Not really, no. I guess where we're affected was just trying to, I guess, support our customers through, an unprecedented time. And it was all different. Each customer was different. So it was, I guess, how the business was structured, what their business model was. So, they might be reliant on, and I guess, talking before about having that brew pub type thing, if you're fully focused on that cellar door type, then you probably struggled quite a bit through COVID. We saw, obviously, in the wine industry, if wineries did a lot of business through their cellar door because they had a restaurant, obviously restaurants had to close down. So, I guess on-site sales, they just stopped. Whereas, people who do a lot in the online space, their sales actually went up. Dan Murphy's, Coles and Woolworths, those guys said that their wine sales or beer sales went up 6%. So, it really did depend on where you were, I guess, what market you were sort of, invested in. So we just had to help some of our customers get through that rough period. Unfortunately, we weren't eligible for any government funding ourselves, and we don't have any bank funding, so we couldn't defer any of our repayments. But just to be able to help a customer get through this tough period by maybe deferring some of the repayments for them, if we can help them get out the other side, then we're happy and they're happy.
Well, thanks again, Jason, for coming on and sharing some time and your insights about a different aspect that I wasn't quite aware of until I spoke to a couple other guests on the show who sort of mentioned you, Hendo being one of them. But yeah, it's something that I'd definitely like to consider. If I've said a couple of times on some of the episodes is, I know how to brew beer, maybe not completely at a commercial level, and that's something that I'm definitely going to start looking into to make sure that I'm right across it. But the thing that I feel that's probably the most out of my control right now, or I'm a little bit unsure of, is making sure I have enough capital behind me to do what I want to do. And if I can't do it, then maybe I have to be patient and wait, or I have to look at other avenues. And, so the equipment financing side does interest me. And I do appreciate you sharing some insights on how it all works and so forth. But before we do sign off, anything you'd like to mention, a bit about the business, how people can reach you, maybe some special offers or services or events that might be coming up?
Yeah, I mean, it is sometimes tough to raise capital to get going. Whether that's outside investment, whether you partner up with a few people to get that initial startup. One of the key things, obviously, is from our point of view when we look at it, is to try and retain that working capital for the business. The first 2 years is going to be a hard slog. So rather than spending all your money to go buy a brewery, retain some of that capital. So if you can get through that first couple of years, because I think the numbers are quite bad when you look at it. I think it's like something like 90% of businesses fail in the first 2 years. So if you can budget and plan to get past that first 2 years, work as hard as you can, hopefully there's a light at the end of the tunnel after that. And we've seen it with a number of breweries we've dealt with. So in regards to, I guess, things coming up or specials around like that, it's probably a bit hard to gauge at this stage with what's happening with COVID. Normally I'm out there traveling. I'm really looking forward to getting back over to Victoria and catching up with some guys over there. But yeah, it's a bit of an unknown at this stage. But yeah, like I said before, make sure you plan as much as you can, and pay the right people to give you the right advice. That's probably key, in making a successful business. So I guess the only other plug, obviously, is, as I mentioned before, I've got another business which Barrel Partners. So we basically really deal in that used wine barrel space. So if anyone's looking for any wine barrels, they can get in contact with me. Obviously, get in contact with the finance business through redwindowscapital.com.au, and the same with barrelpartners.com.au. That's probably the easiest way. Just simply drop us an email with your inquiry, and I'll get back to you generally within the same day.
Great. Well, thanks again, Jason, for coming on the Build Me Brewery podcast. Everyone, that was Jason Baylis from Red Windows Capital.
No worries. Thanks, Chris.
Thanks for listening to another episode of the Build Me a Brewery podcast. That concludes the financing and capital raising segment of the series. We now move on to small business and accounting considerations, where I sit down with two qualified accountants with direct experience working with clients within the brewing industry. They are Jared Wilson from Craft Accounting and Adam Wilson from Upside Accounting, and no relation between the two. As always, if you are liking the podcast so far and find the content useful, please give us a follow and rating on whatever platform you're listening on. Also, follow us on all our social media handles, as well as visiting our website, www.buildmeabrewery.com.au. And much more complimentary content will be coming your way, folks, hopefully in the first couple of weeks of the new year. And also, please make sure you sign up to our mailing list. Stay tuned for our next segment airing next week. I'm Chris Hayton, your host, and this is the Build Me a Brewery podcast.